Hey guys, this week we are continuing in our Apocalypse series, walking through the book of Revelation over the next couple weeks. So this past week we were in chapter 2, next week will be chapter 3. In these two chapters, we're looking at letters that are written to 7 churches. And these churches were actual historical churches. But like I said, in a lot of ways, they're kind of representative of all churches. And it's really good for us as we seek to be a faithful church to look back at those that have gone before. There are things we can learn from them. We can learn from things they did well, but we can also learn from some of the pitfalls, some of the areas where they got it wrong. And so Jesus writes to these churches, and he is affirming them in some ways. He's also rebuking them in some ways. And so this week we looked at the first 4 churches to kind of see what pitfalls and what areas, again, that we could avoid. And essentially what we find is that the reason these churches got into some trouble is that they began to prioritize some of the wrong things. And so really the lesson for us is about our priorities as a church. So the big ideas are that, number one, we see this from the church in Ephesus, that the church is in danger when it prioritizes religious appearance over real love and affection for Christ. We saw that trying to keep up religious appearances may actually rob you of affection for Christ at times. Number 2, we saw this from the church in Smyrna, is that the church is in danger when it prioritizes physical riches over spiritual riches. Okay? You don't want to get to the end of your life and be physically rich, but spiritually poor. And the church in Smyrna actually got it right. They were doing really, really well. Number 3, and we learned this from the church in Pergamum, that the church is in danger when it prioritizes false gospels over the real gospel. And there were a couple of heresies that began to lead people astray there. And so, there's always going to be a temptation to easily believe something that makes you feel better about yourself. Funny how that works, right? And then finally, from the church in Thyatira, we learn that the church is in danger when it prioritizes inclusion over discipleship. We want to be an inclusive place, but we don't want to prioritize that over making disciples. And so we said that Jesus meets us and receives us as we are. That's true, but he doesn't leave us that way, so that we continue to walk in sin. And so those are the lessons this week from those 4 churches. And then here are some questions this week you can discuss in your groups. As always, what was most interesting or encouraging to you from the sermon? And then number 2, what was most challenging or raised further questions for you this week? And then here's some additional questions, and there's kind of layers to these. So the church in Ephesus was doing some really good things, but they had lost their love and affection for Jesus. So why is it so important that our works as a church be rooted in love and affection for Christ? What can be the problem if they're not? And then how do we maintain love and affection for Christ while doing the good things that God has called us to do? All right. Next question. The 2 main false gospels or false beliefs in Pergamum were basically leading people astray, and they taught that you could sort of believe in God or believe in Jesus, but still practice the sensual desires of your heart. In other words, that how you live your life didn't really matter as long as you believed in God or believed in Jesus. Sounds familiar, right? A lot of people sort of live like that today. So what's the problem with this way of thinking? If salvation is by grace and it's not based on what we do, then why can't we just live however we want? Let's take some time and discuss that, all right? And then finally, question 5. So in Revelation 2, verse 20, Jesus calls out the church in Thyatira for, quote, tolerating that woman, Jezebel. And so the issue of tolerance and inclusion. So should Christians be tolerant people? Should there be limits to our tolerance? And then should our tolerance look different towards outsiders than it does towards those that are in the church? So just some complicated questions regarding tolerance and inclusion and where lines should be. And so just take some time as a group and maybe discuss that a little bit. The action step this week was to consider what priorities in your life need to change in order for you to be more spiritually rich. And then, you can talk about in your group whether you've had time to sort of consider that and think through priorities if you guys have time. All right? Hope you're enjoying the series. We'll look at the 3 other churches in chapter 3 next Sunday, and we hope to see you guys there.